This is Africa Live on CCTV News with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. Investment destinations. We look at Nigeria's rising lure and the threat it poses to South Africa. And playoff fears why Ghana's Football Association is wary ahead of a tie with Egypt. A ship carrying African migrants towards Italy sank off the Sicilian island of Lampedusa on Thursday, killing at least 94 asylum seekers. The Italian news agency ANSA quoted the local mayor of Lampedusa, Giuseppe Nicolini, as saying those killed include several children and women. So far, more than 150 people have been rescued, but still about 250 others are missing, according to Italian Transport Minister Maurizio Lupi. The asylum seekers said they were from Eritrea and Somalia. Now, some migrants say they lit a small fire on the boat around half a mile from the shore to cause attention after the vessel suffered an engine failure. The fire then spread, sowing panic on board, which caused the boat to flip over. In a reaction to the sinking of the boat, the European Union Commission says the bloc should step up its efforts to fight people smuggling networks, at the same time opening more legal ways for people to enter Europe.
Behind this tragedy and many other tragedies, there are criminals and criminal networks who are exploiting human beings in despair. And the reality is that smuggling is a crime that is generating huge profits for these networks. So we really have to step up our efforts in order to fight these criminal networks. We have to avoid that they put people lives at risk on overcrowded and unseaworthy vessels.
Well, according to the UNHCR spokesperson Laurent Jols in Rome, the boat set off from Libya and many of those on board were migrants from Eritrea. Lampedusa is an Italian island lying between Tunisia and Sicily and is a major entryway for asylum seekers into Europe. There has been an increase in the incidence of Italy recently amid an upsurge in arrivals mainly from Egypt, Eritrea, Somalia and Syria. According to the UNHCR, some 13,000 people reached Italy by sea last year. Well, earlier we spoke to our correspondent Jack Barton, who's in Rome following up the incident. Here's what he knows about that tragedy.
Well, unfortunately, this is an all too regular occurrence over the past few years, so there is a large Italian Coast Guard presence in those waters off of Lampedusa, and several vessels of all sizes have been able to respond to that, the sinking of that boat. Now, the Coast Guard have been bringing the bodies into shore. It is a horrific sight in Lampedusa at the moment, a long line of bodies near the waterfront under green tarps. But of course, the Coast Guard has also been bringing in survivors. And what they've been telling officials is that the boat was very close to the coast, less than a kilometre, when the engine broke down. And they began wallowing in the water, and in fear that the boat might capsize, someone lit a fire to try and draw the attention of people on the shore. But that fire quickly spread, and people began jumping into the water as the fire engulfed the boat, so they weren't actually killed by the fire. So a terrible tragedy, but the Coast Guard is still out there searching for those survivors, but with so many still missing, it seems fairly certain that that death toll will tragically be climbing still throughout the night.
Jack Barton following that development for us in Rome. Now, at least 15 passengers died after a chartered plane crashed in the bush and burst into flames minutes after taking off from the Lagos airport on Thursday. Officials say the plane was carrying 27 people and was bound for Akure, which lies 225 kilometers northeast of Lagos. It was reported that the pilot of the plane detected a fault soon after taking off and tried to return to the airport for a crash landing, but did not make it. Although Nigeria's air safety record has improved in recent years, the country has a history of major passenger plane crashes. Now, more than 150 people were killed in June last year after a dual engine failure caused a plane to crash in Lagos. Rescue efforts of the current plane crash are still underway.
In propeller aircraft marked 5 and BJY crashed around 9:32 a.m. on its way to Akure with 20 passengers on board. The rescue operation commenced immediately with all the relevant agencies moving en masse to the crash site to rescue victims. And we can confirm to you that 5 of the victims have already been rushed to the hospital, and all the agencies are already on ground to monitor and rescue victims.
And staying in West Africa, Gambia's government announced on Wednesday that it had pulled out from the Commonwealth, insisting it will not be a member of any neo-colonial institution. And according to our statement, the government also noted that Gambia is a party to any constitution that represents an extension of colonialism. Now, no further details were given on joined the Commonwealth in 1965. The bloc is a voluntary association of more than 50 countries, many of them former territories of the British Empire. Let's get more now on this, and we're joined by Richard Bestik, who's joining us live from London. Richard, thank you very much for joining us there. Any reaction from the Commonwealth office yet on this development from the Gambia?
Well, the Commonwealth office here in London appears as bemused as everyone else. There's no clear indication as to what finally triggered the decision by the Gambian president. The Commonwealth office saying they were given no prior notice, and they're trying to make contact with President Jammeh. That the announcement on Gambian TV cited neo-colonial reasons might suggest the target for the president's decision is more the UK government than the Commonwealth itself. There's a history of tension between President Jammeh and the UK government. A Foreign Office report published earlier in the year singled out Gambia for what it said was its poor record on human rights. On the record, the Foreign Office here says it very much regrets Gambia's withdrawal, but said decisions on membership of the Commonwealth were a matter for each member government.
Richard, what benefits, though, would be lost, or what benefits are lost to Gambia as it withdraws from the Commonwealth?
Well, they're largely intangible. The Commonwealth is a grouping of 54 nations from a variety of backgrounds with a joint population of 2.2 billion people. So clearly there are some benefits of being associated with what is at the very least a powerful international lobbying group and best a source of contacts for global trade. And despite its undeniable colonial roots, the Commonwealth does appear to be maintaining a relevance in the modern world. The Gambia is the first nation to pull out since President Robert Mugabe withdrew Zimbabwe in 2003. But 3 African countries have joined in recent years. Rwanda, the latest in 2009, following Cameroon and Mozambique in 1995. The timing of the Gambia withdrawal, though, will be a blow for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in 6 weeks' time, where it will certainly be a focus of some debate, especially among the African leaders representing the Commonwealth there.
All right, Richard Bestik joining us there from London. Thank you. You're watching Africa Live on CCTV News. Coming up on the program. Nightmare in Mogadishu. We revisit the day American troops were forced to retreat from their Somalia mission.
There are no limits to what you can achieve. You are the smartest generation that we've ever had.
Young and ready to change the world. The latest from the One Young World Meet in South Africa.
The daring and savagery of new terror attacks in Kenya and Nigeria pose fresh security challenges for Africa and the wider international community.
We shall not relent on the war on terror.
Excesses of Boko Haram must stop.
In the wake of this threat, Africa's economic gains are in danger. Is it time for global war on terror focused on Africa? This week in Talk Africa.
Well, today marks the 20th anniversary of one of East Africa's most notorious episodes, Black Hawk Down. And that's when American troops fought a murderous battle with gunmen in the heart of Mogadishu. The fight lasted less than a day, but it's colored America's relations toward the continent ever since. CCTV's Robert Nagila tells us more.
It should have been a routine raid by American troops, well used to darting in and out of Mogadishu to capture a suspect. This time, though, it would be different. The soldiers had been sent there to back up a UN aid effort. Mogadishu's warlords had been taking food shipments and shooting peacekeepers. And one particular warlord, Mohammed Farah Aidid, was the Americans' target on 3rd October 1993. Straight away, the raid ran into heavy fire. Survivors would recount how it seemed the entire city had come out to fight. Then, militia shot down a US military helicopter. As the troops tried to reach the crash site, they were split up, got lost, and took more casualties. And then, a second helicopter was shot down. By the time the troops fought their way out, at least 1,000 Somalis were dead. Fewer than 20 Americans lost their lives. But the impact back home was immense, particularly when images emerged of bodies being dragged through the streets. Bowing to public uproar, US President Bill Clinton pulled the troops out soon after. For the warlords, that was seen as a great victory. For the people of Somalia, the episode heralded years of suffering, while the world stood back and did nothing. Robert Nagila, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, for many Somalis, the battle was just one element in a conflict that lasted years. Mogadishu is still struggling to recover. CCTV's Mohammed Hirmoge tells us more.
Most people here are too young to remember what happened on 3rd October 1993. And officials in this city are trying to portray the capital as one that's rapidly rebuilding. But Mogadishu is still living with the legacy of the battle 20 years ago. After the fight, the international community largely turned its back, and Somalia descended into years of fighting and famine. Recently, the African Union force AMISOM helped stabilize the city, but there are many parts of Mogadishu that still remain the preserve of gunmen. The Bakara market, where the Americans fought 20 years ago today, is one of them. These days, though, it's not so much warlords or militia causing the trouble. It's Al-Qaeda allied group, Al-Shabaab. Mohammed Hirmoge, CCTV, Mogadishu.
Well, Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud marked the day with a commemoration speech remembering Somali and American lives lost in the Black Hawk Down incident. And while pointing out that the incident had undermined Somalia's image across the world, the president celebrated the new ties between Somalia and the United States. He noted that America was the first country to recognize his government and renew ties with Somalia. He said, I quote, "As we celebrate our recovery, we also mark with sadness and respect the lives lost on both sides in the madness of that conflict, and we say firmly, never, never again," end of quote. Well, let's get more analysis and details now on that. We're joined here in studio by Patrick Miruri, the Eastern Africa senior producer, Reuters Television. Patrick worked in television since the late 1990s, initially with the late Mohammed Amin as a cameraman covering most conflicts in the region and beyond since early 1994. We're also joined by CCTV's Daniel Ranger, standing by live in Washington. Daniel, first, I'll start with you. Now, the events of this day, dubbed Black Hawk Down, are viewed by many as a dark patch in America's history. How is this day, though, remembered in the United States?
Well, I think this was a very important moment for the psyche and consciousness of American power abroad. And after the incident, it was made much clearer to the American public when one of those involved who survived, Jeff Strucker, spoke to the Philadelphia Examiner newspaper, and that led to a book, and that book led to a film. Black Hawk Down is a very well-known film for anybody who lived through that generation. and it really laid bare, I think, to Americans how vulnerable their troops were in that particular situation. So it's become a very iconic image of the limits of American power, I think. And indeed, that Army Ranger who then spoke to the Philadelphia Examiner has recently made a short film in which he was the first of those soldiers to go back to Mogadishu, drive through the streets and the market where the confrontation took place and where the two Black Hawk helicopters came down. A very eerie moment for him, especially as there is still, as you well know, a lot of security vulnerabilities in that country. So I think he is able to still tell the story of what it was like to be in that situation and bring back those moments that have been etched into the memory of many Americans.
All right, Patrick, though, you were in Somalia during that time and during that period of the 1990s. What was it like?
Initially, it was fine when the Americans came in. They came in as part of a wider UN force to try and bring peace and feed a lot of starving people. They were welcomed really well. And then down the line, suddenly, the issue changed from trying to feed the people to bring peace to chase after warlords, who they said were holding people ransom and stealing food and collecting taxes and all that. And from then on, it became the good people, supposedly the Americans, against the warlords.
There were a lot of people, though, that lost their lives at that time, including some of your colleagues.
Indeed, yes, especially in 1993, when it became an all-out war between General Aidid's people and the Americans. A lot of people were killed, a lot of innocent people.
Daniel, how did the events, though, around the Black Hawk Down incident or that particular incident in the 1990s impact U.S. diplomacy and military intervention in Africa?
A massive sense of disengagement from these issues, and as we know, it emboldened the movement that became known as Al-Shabaab. That has directly impacted the United States and also very recently, obviously, Kenya. And so that sort of memory of that disengagement is still clear in the strategic issues that we face today. It's also meant that more broadly, there's been a reluctance both on the part of the United States and on governments in Africa to have US boots on the ground. An issue of huge political sensitivity that indeed led the AFRICOM, a US Africa command, to base itself not in any African country but in Stuttgart, Germany. So that has had direct strategic implications. And on top of that, I think there is an argument being put out there that the fact of this terrible incident led to a reluctance to go and intervene in humanitarian issues in Africa again. Some people think that if it hadn't have been for this incident, the US may have decided to intervene in the Rwandan genocide and therefore potentially prevented many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people from being slaughtered in that incident. So there are many strategic, humanitarian and diplomatic issues that emanated from this issue.
All right. Patrick, though, Daniel talks about this incident having perhaps changed the way America looked at Africa from then on. But did it change, though, the way the world viewed Somalia moving forward?
I think it did, because the moment, as they call them, this bunch of ragtag militias are able to knock out the world superpower, that nobody else was willing to go out there and risk getting involved. And suddenly you had the rest of the people who are in the UN force also pulling out, that it became too dangerous for aid agencies not having security. So they all pulled out, and suddenly, the last scenes I remember when the Americans pulled out, the last group was people looting everything from wash basins, toilet seats, everything. And suddenly it just went back to what it was in the early 1991s.
All right, but has this had an impact, though, on the international community and how it has reacted to the conflict moving forward, given the fact that Somalia itself had been lawless for about 20 years?
I would say since that time, a lot of people kept off because they thought this is a place that is completely hopeless, leave it to their own people, maybe they will come around and sort it out themselves. A lot of conferences have been held, people have tried, the UN, the Ethiopians, Kenya. It's only until, I would say, a few years ago when suddenly everyone realized there has to be a way to bring peace to Somalia.
All right, Patrick Meruri in studio with us. Thank you for your insights. Now, Daniel Rangers with us in Washington. Do stay with us there for a moment longer, because the United States has slapped sanctions on Rwanda on Thursday over the use of child soldiers by the M23 rebels, who Rwanda has been accused of supporting. Now, the U.S. State Department official Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of African Affairs, announced the sanctions on Thursday in an online forum with African reporters. Thomas-Greenfield gave few details but said the sanctions are related to a rebel group in eastern Congo that Rwanda is accused of supporting. Now, the United Nations experts say Rwanda has provided arms and training to the M23 group, a group that has seized a territory in Congo's North Kivu province. Rwanda denies backing the rebels, maintaining that Kigali has always worked towards greater stability and security in the Great Lakes region. Let's go back now to Daniel Rangers in Washington, D.C. for more details on this development. Daniel, do we know in specific terms what the sanctions entail and why they are being imposed at the moment?
Well, I've just come off the line to a State Department official, and I can tell you that technically these are not sanctions. What this relates to is the Child Soldiers Protection Act of 2008. And what that basically does, it obliges the US not to engage with certain types of military aid and not to sell certain types of weapons, military weapons, to the country that is deemed to be supporting child soldiers. Now, there are some countries where the US has identified there being child soldiers, such as in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but where the president has deemed it necessary to waive those restrictions, even though they've identified there being child soldiers. And in the case of the Democratic Republic of Congo, they believe that good faith efforts are being made there to try to eliminate the problem after the DRC signed a particular set of agreements with the United Nations, for example. But in the case of Rwanda, they believe that they are not waiving the ability to provide military aid. So the president's decided that Rwanda is still flagrantly violating its responsibilities on child soldiers. And this is the latest that I've had from the State Department. The Rwanda government's support for the M23, an armed rebel group which continues to actively recruit and abduct children in the Rwandan territory, threatens peace and stability in the eastern DRC. What does this mean in real terms? Well, there are some minimal amounts of military aid called International Military Education and Training, IMET. Those will be waived for the Rwandans, but they will continue to see other methods of support within the military. So it is rather limited in its scope.
All right, Daniel Rangers joining us there from Washington, D.C. Thank you. You're watching Africa Live on CCTV News. Still to come on the program.
You have wider horizons. There are no limits to what you can achieve. You are the smartest generation that we've ever had.
Young and ready to change the world. The latest from the One Young World Meet in South Africa. Stay with us. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni has stepped up his criticism of the International Criminal Court. He says the continent does not need the ICC's help and that the court is being misused by what he calls enemies of Africa. CCTV's Isabel Nakiria has more.
The trial of Kenya's deputy president resumed this week at the International Criminal Court. William Ruto is charged with crimes against humanity. Kenya's president Uhuru Kenyatta is due on trial next month, facing the same charges. Prosecutors claim they orchestrated the violence that followed Kenya's 2007 elections, in which more than 1,000 people were killed. Uganda's president insists the ICC is incapable of dispensing justice in the Kenyan case.
That issue is not legal. It is ideological. And that's how it should be handled. So therefore, this ICC, they are very shallow people.
It's not the first time such attack Museveni has launched. He criticized the ICC at Kenyatta's inauguration and last week at the UN General Assembly. But it's by far his strongest condemnation.
Those who are talking of tribes and sectarianism are really enemies of Africa, enemies of me as an individual, or you as an individual.
Kenya's parliament has voted through a motion to withdraw from the ICC. And the African Union has called a special session for the 13th October to debate on African-wide withdrawal. Museveni says growing opposition to the ICC in Africa should be of no surprise. Uganda has itself referred a case to the ICC, and that's of warlord Joseph Kony. But the president says that's because Kony had fled the country and was terrorizing neighboring countries. Museveni insists the Kenya case can best be solved by the traditional means. Isabel Nakiria, CCTV, Kampala.
The African Union has called a special summit to discuss a mass withdrawal from the ICC in protest at Kenya's case. The extraordinary summit will be held in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, on the 13th of October. It is, however, not clear if Kenya has secured the support of the required two-thirds of the African Union member states to convene an extraordinary summit. The AU Commission Chair, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, says that the Commission does not yet have a stance on the proposed mass withdrawal of African countries from the ICC. The African Union is, however, concerned that having both Kenya's president and the deputy president on trial at the same time will lead to constitutional problems in Kenya.
We'd like Kenya to remain stable because they've done a lot of work since 2007 to reconcile the different people who were fighting, to stabilize the country, to reform, to look at how to deal with diversity more effectively, to decentralize their new constitution. It decentralizes power to the lower levels, not just the national. So they've done a lot in terms of getting their country back to stability. And as the AU, we would like that stability to remain.
Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan has officially opened Africa's first One Young World Conference in South Africa. The meeting gathers young leaders from all over the world and puts them in the same room as some of the big names of business, politics, social welfare, to name but a few. The agenda is a pretty ambitious one. CCTV's Guy Henderson reports from Johannesburg.
Flying the flags of 190 countries. Young leaders flown in for the fourth conference of its kind, but the first on African soil. The message from its patrons that this is the generation that matters perhaps more than any before it.
You have wider horizons. There are no limits to what you can achieve. You are the smartest generation that we've ever had.
Using success stories. A celebration of youth, but much more than that. In the light of day, delegates are in the mood to get things done.
Our obsessive focus is about tangible action. We say to every delegate who is here, what is it that you are doing, what have you done and what are you going to do because of One Young World? And we have impact committees that look at what got done, what got achieved.
And the problems they're tasked with solving are daunting. You'd have to spend long here to get an idea of just how ambitious this conference is. A little earlier we had a session on solving the world's obesity crisis with a little help from the chef Jamie Oliver. About to start behind us in the main hall, a session on human rights hosted by Bob Geldof. And then a little later, a session on making business more sustainable with the CEO of Unilever. The elders here are of the view that they have at times messed things up.
There's a sense of dismay that grown men of the age of Kofi or Eunice or myself should behave in such a pathetically dangerous and embarrassing way.
And say that those who'll bear the burden should have a platform now to do it better.
This is unprecedented in the world. That's what I believe. That's what I think. I doubt even if Olympics can gather so many people from all 190 countries around.
So I'm here actually to learn about best strategies of what works in other countries and what does not work, and also to replicate, some of these wonderful programs, projects young people are doing across the world.
Fellow leaders, among the 8 of us.
They might be talking, but a talk shop, this is not. Guy Henderson, CCTV, Johannesburg.
Let's now take a look at Africa's business at this hour with Penina Karibe. Penina.